A year ago was probably one of the toughest seasons of my life. We were going through immigration stuff where we kind of got deported at one point, and our immigration was all up in the air. We weren't allowed to work for 4 months, and there was nothing we could do. All we could do was wait on bureaucracy. There was no one we could talk to. There was nothing that we could say. We just had to wait. And so obviously with that came some pretty big financial challenges. In addition to that, there was, with the other campus that we were once connected to, there was some conflict, there was some misunderstanding, there was some differences of opinions, there was some relational struggle, and all of that kind of compounded itself in a season just over a year ago. And I remember coming home from some meetings, and all I could do is lay face down on the floor in the middle of the living room. That was all I could think of to do. That was all I had the ability to do. And in the evenings, right around 6:30, I was useless. Jen will attest to that. I was absolutely useless. I would just lay down on the couch and fall asleep at like 6:30. But the weird thing was, physically, I was fine, right? I wasn't struggling. I wasn't training for a triathlon or an Ironman. But I was absolutely exhausted. And for me, it was this real moment of remembering that we are an interconnected whole, that we have different parts that all fit together, that we are a holistic being and not just physical. In fact, the Bible says it this way: a joyful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones. Meaning that when our spirit is off, when emotionally we're struggling, that we feel it physically. That each part of us is interconnected. And it's why we've seen so many studies lately that stress has such a negative impact on our physical health, that we are a holistic person. And one of the things that Jesus says that has resounded most with me is in John 10:10, Jesus says, "I have come that you might have life and have it to the full, have life abundantly." Jesus didn't come saying, "I've come that you might start a religion or that you might have more rules and regulations." Jesus said, "I want you to experience life and life to the full." And I believe that means it's a holistic life as well, that he doesn't want us just someday to avoid hell. That obviously is a big part. Obviously, the Bible speaks a lot of that. But today, in our lives today, Jesus wants you to experience life. It's why we gather together, is to press into that together of what is this abundant life that God wants us to live, and how do we live it out together. But if we're honest, are we really living an abundant life? I think it maybe in seasons, but most people I talk to, as we have conversations, most people are exhausted. We're tired, we're worn down, we're just trying to get through to the next day. And honestly, I think that's why we have so many relational issues, is because everyone's just barely getting along and trying to grab at whatever it is we feel like we need to get through to the next day, and if that means I need to take it from somebody else, then I'll do that. And I think that's a major issue. And Jesus wants more for us than simply stumbling through each day exhausted. He wants us to have an abundant life. And Jesus says in Matthew 11, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." It's an invitation. Other translations say, "All you who are weary, all you who feel tired." I don't know if you resonate with that in this January season. Everyone who feels tired and weary, you feel like you're laboring, you're heavy laden, you're bearing down. There's a weight on your shoulders that you're having a hard time carrying. He says, "Come to me and I will give you rest, refreshment, reprieve." But what it says here also is that it requires action. It's not, hey, if you're feeling heavy laden and you're feeling weary and tired, go and retreat. Go off on your own and run away and escape. He says, no, if you are tired, come to me. Take my yoke upon you. That 2,000 years ago, a yoke looked like this. It would tie two oxen together, and they were carrying maybe a wagon or a load, pulling something behind them, and these two oxen would be tied together with this yoke. But a yoke often would tie two oxen together, one weaker or younger than the other. And it wasn't just about sharing the load. That was part of it. It was also about training. The goal wasn't just output. The older, more experienced ox would, in doing it together side by side, tied to a yoke, learn how to walk, how to turn, how to pull, how to stop, how to pace itself. And so being yoked together with Jesus here is also come and learn from me. Take on this burden, take on a yoke, tie yourself to me, and I will bring you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. That gentle and lowly in heart, the word is meek. It's about, listen, when we tie ourselves to Jesus, Jesus is not going, all right, fine, you need to get it in my plan, that you need to do it my way, that it's all about me getting my way, and you're going to help me earn and me succeed. Meekness is being able to say, no, I want you to succeed. I'm going to put myself aside in humility because I want you to go ahead. That's meekness. Jesus says, be yoked to him because he's meek. He wants us to experience life. And we see the gospel is that Jesus lays down his life on the cross so that we can experience life here, now, and forever, that we can be reconciled, reunited with God, come under that grace, the mercy, the love of God for life here, now, and forever. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. That word easy in the Greek, krestos, doesn't mean effortless. It's not simple. It's not like without weight or work. It means kind, well-fitting, suitable, gracious, not harsh. And so it's almost this upside down thing where if you are tired and you are weary, you are exhausted, you are run down, Jesus says, don't run away and hide, don't retreat and escape. He says, grab the yoke and work with me. He says, come and take effort with me because the effort will bring you life. How do we get tired? If we look at beyond just the physical, this author, Peter Scazzaro, helped me kind of understand this, that there are 5 aspects of our lives. And we can get exhausted and tired in each one. The first is physical. We get that. We all have physical bodies. We get being physically tired. And the Bible speaks to that. In the Old Testament, there's a commandment. It says here in Mark, and he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. That we are created, designed to have rhythms of work and rest. And there's a reason why it's a commandment. It's because it actually goes against our nature. We just want to keep going, want to keep working. But we are physically made to stop and to rest. But rest does not just mean retreat on our own. It's intentional rest. The Bible builds in these intentional things that we should be about in that rest, and that ultimately is about relational rest, about not these religious duties of things that we can't do, but it's about relationship and spending intentional time with God. And even as you look at the science behind rest and how do we find physical rest, it's about eating well. Right? The Bible talks about celebration, about enjoying. It's about playing well and being active. It's also about sleep. The Lord gives rest to those he loves. Physically, if we are exhausted, there's a path forward, but part of it is forcing ourselves to stop, even though that means, and it intentionally means, when we stop working, we're saying, it is not up to me. The work will never end, whatever it is, but we have to force ourselves to stop. And listen, I'm preaching to myself. I am terrible at this. I am feeling convicted and shamed and guilty. All those things right now, but I need to do it. Because there's always more work to do, but the reason we have to take a Sabbath is take a break and go, physically, it's not all up to me. And force ourselves to rest. The second component of us is intellectual. That we get mentally, intellectually tired. And part of that comes from just the stress of having to think through all the implications. And how do I fix this? And what do I do with this? And what happens here? And what about the finances? And what about the government? And what about all of the stuff and the chaos? And we're always thinking about all these things. It's like we're spinning plates. And in our minds, we're always thinking about what happens here. And how do I react to this? And what happens if this happens? And we're always spinning these plates intellectually. And our natural response to being intellectually just drained, right? Being stressed is to pull up a screen and turn our brains off, right? That's the natural reaction that we all have nowadays is I'm going to turn my brain off and watch a screen. But actually studies have shown that screen time maybe pauses some of that, but our brain remains active and it doesn't actually bring us rest. It may make us feel better in the moment with a burst of dopamine, but it doesn't actually remove or give us rest from our intellectual stress. Jesus says this, look at the birds of the air. And actually some translations, maybe even better, say consider. Consider the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather in barns, and yet our heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they? And so what Jesus is trying to say here is that our intellectual rest, that rest from the stress in our brains, does not come from screens. And it doesn't come from trying to unplug our brains. It actually comes from focused wonder, of taking our minds and fixing them on something larger than ourselves, that we take that and we bring it to God and we consider the God of the universe, that we consider his sovereignty and his love and his goodness. And it's like, I sometimes see prayer like you bring all this baggage and it's weighing you down. You can't carry it anymore, and you bring all of it to God, and you're dying under the weight of it. But in prayer, we lift our eyes up to God, and when we see the infinite, when we see the eternal, when we see the love, when we see the cross, all of a sudden this weight that we're carrying becomes lighter in that perspective. And so what Jesus is telling us is the way to intellectual rest, the way to find rest in our stress is not to think our way out of it or to simply turn our brain off for a little while. It's actually to fix our minds on God and to see his control and to find rest in his plan, in his sovereignty. Eastern meditation says that we need to empty our minds, that we need to create a vacuum. But we all know that vacuums quickly get filled again. In fact, Christian meditation, though, would say it's not about emptying our minds. It's about filling our minds with truth. And we understand the truth of God's love for us, his sovereignty, his plan, that that he works all things together for the good of those who love him. And we trust that he even works in the brokenness. Consider it pure joy when you face trials of many kinds. When we fix our minds on those things, that we can find rest in the midst of our stress. It's not about retreat, it's about connection to God. The third kind of tiredness that we experience is relational, that we are relational beings. In fact, all the way back, Genesis 2, the beginning of the Bible, it says that it is not good that man should be alone, that we were made to be in relationship. But if we're honest, relationship costs. Relationship costs us, and it can be exhausting. Especially if we have relationships where we're constantly pouring out. In those interactions where we're sharing, we're caring, we're pouring into others, eventually what happens is we become drained if all we're doing is pouring out. We're pouring into our kids, our employees, right? Are the people around us, our family members that we're constantly pouring out. It is no surprise that we end up dry and empty. And the natural reaction in response to that is I need to go and be by myself. I need to be alone. And that may pause some of it, but what happens is we withdraw then from the very thing that heals us. That when we retreat from people in our relational exhaustion, we remove ourselves from the remedy because we were made to be in relationship, but healthy relationship, where there are people who pour into us. We need people around us pouring into us into us relationally. And what happens too, though, sometimes is there are people, and maybe you know these people, maybe it's not difficult to think of someone who walks around with a bucket and is just like, you need to pour in here, right? And just every conversation, every interaction is just about me and my stories and my stuff, and they just want to get poured into. And eventually what happens to those people is everyone around them runs out, and there's no one else to pour into them, and then they just become stagnant. And no one wants to be around them because all they're doing is collecting, and it becomes a stagnant pool. We need this rhythm of being poured into, but also pouring into others. And it's part of the reason why we gather on a Sunday. It's why God says, do not neglect meeting together, because we need those healthy relationships. That's how we recharge, is hopefully by people around us who love us and care for us, who want to encourage us and pour into us. That's one of our hopes for Sunday, and why we hope that people don't just run away after, and why we have monthly brunches and we try and have events, is so that relationally we have people around you who can pour into you. And if you are feeling emotionally exhausted right now, and you don't feel like you have people who will pour into you, please reach out to me. I'd love to take you out for a coffee. I'd love to just pour into you and encourage you. It's part of my role. Number 4 is we have emotional exhaustion. Our emotions are not just feelings. They're a little different. Actually, it's amazing when you look at the science of our emotions, that the information goes through our limbic system. Actually, we feel things before we think them. That's why when you're walking down, a dark street and there's an alley and out of the corner of your eye you see a figure, with a dark hood over their face walking towards you, right? Instantly, without processing, like, I wonder who that person is, or if I know them, or if no, instantly you have fear. Your heart rate kicks right up, adrenaline pumps, right? Your muscles tense. Why? Because your emotions are trying to get you to do something. Your emotions take information and they try and motivate you to act on them. And so you get, the burst of adrenaline and emotion and to flee to your car, right? And then you lock your doors, and what's supposed to happen is you get in your car and you lock your doors and you go, oh, right? And you get release. The emotion has done its work. You have moved out of danger. But what happens is sometimes that we receive these emotional impulses. It's your body trying to motivate you to do something, but we get stuck in them and we don't process them. And what happens when our emotions stay triggered is that we burn out our adrenal glands, right? And we become emotionally drained and exhausted because we don't bring our emotions to their conclusion. For example, maybe you are today feeling sad. I am sad today. I am sad that a PI wasn't called in the end zone. I'm sad that we didn't catch that ball, even though it was a catch. I'm sad that actually, you know what? I'm angry at those things, actually. I'm just sad that my Bills lost yesterday, again, in a heartbreaking fashion in overtime. Now, I can let that emotion, I can deny it and pretend it's not there, but it is. I can let that emotion just sort of remain and eat away at me, and what it'll do is make me bitter and cynical like a Cowboys fan. Oh. Or what I need to do is I need to process it. I need to take it to God in relationship. Remember that yoke? I need to walk alongside him in my emotions and go, God, help me process this. And my anger, he reminds me, the refs are just humans. They're doing their best. There isn't a conspiracy. You need to get over it. And in my sadness, hey, guess what? You didn't take a single snap for the Bills this year, right? Why does that it's not your identity. It's not your value. It's not your worth. You don't even live in the city. Right? Oh, yeah, you're right. And then I have to do that every hour or so for a while. But we need to take our emotions and bring them to God and allow him to process them, because sometimes our emotions are wrong. We feel things. Just because we feel things doesn't mean they're right. And we need to process them, like we sit in the car and we need to go, hey, should I have been afraid of that person? You come to find out, oh no, they were just someone who was cold, who had their hood up, who were also just walking to their car. Not everyone is out to attack me and get me. But what happens with PTSD, for example, is that we experience this emotion of fear, but we feel trapped in it, in this trauma. And what happens is that fear emotion continues with you through life because it's never resolved. And so we need to bring our emotions to resolution. We bring them to Jesus and we invite him into those. If you're feeling sad or down or just off, you just feel strange, you feel angry, you feel bitter, rather than allowing that to just stew, we grab the yoke next to Jesus and we invite him to walk into that and say, what is it? Where is this coming from? What is this trying to trigger? What started this? What am I supposed to do with this? And we invite him to speak truth to us. The prophet Elijah in the Old Testament was on the run for his life. He was running for years and living in the wilderness, always in fear, always looking over his shoulder. Jezebel was trying to kill him, right? Ahab, they were chasing him down. And then eventually he has this monumental moment where it's him and 300 prophets of Baal, and they're on this mountain, and there's this miraculous, God shows up and vindicates Elijah, years on the run, being like, I'm the prophet of the one true God, and all these other people are running around being crazy. And he's vindicated on this mountain where God shows up and brings fire, and it's this like celebratory win. Look at that, even Elijah gets a win once in a while. But then Jezebel chases him again, and he ends up in the desert alone, again, hiding. And he cries out to God. He's like, what the heck, God? And he's emotionally exhausted. Years in fear, years on the run. And he cries out to God. But you know what? God doesn't shame him. God doesn't say, get over it. Instead, God brings him food, gives him rest, And then God has this moment where he shows them, hey, there's this loud booming, earthquake, and there's fire, and there's rumbling. But God's voice isn't in any of those big major things. God doesn't come down yelling at Elijah to get over it and to deal with it. Instead, there's this small voice. There's this really small voice that meets with Elijah in a cave and says, you're not alone. I know you feel like you're alone, but you're not alone. And that I'm with you. And he speaks to this emotional exhaustion that Elijah has. To see that he doesn't have to live in fear and that he's not alone. And that God wants to speak to us too. But we need to process it with him. We need to bring him those things so he can walk with us in them. And then the last type of exhaustion, the last facet of our personhood, right? We have physical, intellectual, relational, emotional. The last is our spiritual. We're experiencing physical exhaustion in this time. See, sometimes it just feels dry, right? We feel disconnected and dry. But spiritual dryness does not mean that God is distant. It just feels like God is distant at times. And that can be because of a lot of reasons. It can be because of guilt or shame that we're carrying that keeps us distant from God. It can be that we've stopped doing the things relationally where we've pulled ourselves away from him and we feel dry because we aren't paying enough time relationally with him. But there are also, all through the Bible, there's times where God will allow people to feel spiritual exhaustion and dryness because it stirs up a hunger and a thirst where we want more. Over and over again in the Psalms, it says things like, cast your burden on the Lord and he will sustain you. He will never permit the righteous to be moved. And there's people who cry out, who are like, God, where are you? How long, oh Lord? And so it's normal to have this spiritual dryness, and it shouldn't drive us to guilt or religion, but just to cry out to him. To cast those burdens on him, and he will sustain us. Scripture says that if we want spiritual vitality and rest, that we can just come to him and meet with him in the Word. What does it mean to be yoked? Part of it means just being in the Word. Part of it means just being in prayer, spending time with him relationally in prayer, about serving other people around us, using our gifts, engaging and being part of a community, gathering a community around us, again, where there's relationship and we're not alone. This series in January, I just wanted to be really practical. Just hyper practical as we start a new year with some new habits, some potential disciplines, things that you can bring into your life practically this year. 2 weeks ago, we talked about connection, how we feel kind of isolated and maybe alone. And what we can do is I encourage you to think about a hobby or something you enjoy doing or want to enjoy doing, and maybe just starting that and inviting people from the community, people that you don't even maybe know who also enjoy that thing, to do it with you and build community and friendship around these things that we enjoy. Last week we talked about prayer and how we need to go deeper in prayer in order to connect with him. And we started, it's in your bulletin, we announced it as well, these prayer prompts. We started them on Monday, where every week I'll text out a prayer prompt to sort of seed your prayer life, hopefully that week, and get you rolling in just sort of that discipline of prayer. But this week I want to talk about spiritual pathways, because each of us are wired differently. God has wired us, made us different. We connect with him in different ways. And each of us have a unique way of connecting in relationships, right? All of our marriages are unique and different. All of our kids are unique and different. The same way our faith, our walk with God, our relationship with God can be different. And so you've got a little insert in your handout that also sort of runs through this. But the first of these spiritual pathways is intellectual. These are people who connect with God through study, through books, through coming up with realizing new ideas, insight, that we read commentaries, and you connect with God by using your mind. That's one way that people connect with God. Now, I'm not saying that there's only one of these that you need to do, but we should be sort of dabbling in all of them as we want to grow in our faith, but some of us have a more natural inclination, the intellectual. The second is the contemplative. These are people who like silence and prayer and reflection, like being alone with God, just in sort of the silence of that moment. For those of us who are ADHD, this is not us. But we just need quiet contemplation, time in a relationship, in presence, contemplative. The third is relational. That we encounter God through relationships with other people. And as we hear each other's stories, as we encourage each other, as we do life together, some people encounter God through those relational connections, and they have to be around people sort of in order to feel like they see what God is doing in their lives, and their relationship with God deepens because they're in relationship with other people. There's the activists. These are people who connect with God by doing things like justice and evangelism, by bringing in institutional change in the community. These people connect with God by being a part of bringing justice. There's the creative. These people are worshipful. It's about art, it's about music, it's about aesthetics. Some people, it's the worship music is for them the moment of the week where they feel closest to God because it drowns out the distractions and it creates this environment where they can just be free with their emotions and celebration and process. And so maybe that's art. The naturalists, these are people who connect with God through the outdoors, through creation, by looking and wondering at the beauty around them, by reflecting and seeing God's handiwork in creation. There's service, people who find a connection to God by serving other people, by helping, by using their gifts and abilities, by simply connecting and helping others. That for them is a way that they connect with God. And then finally, there's traditionalist. The traditionalist is someone who loves liturgy and ancient prayers and things that people have been praying or saying for thousands of years and being part of something larger than ourselves. And maybe it involves candles or more of a traditional experience of worship. And so I don't know where you fit. I mean, it's healthy to be in and around these, but especially if you're spiritually exhausted and you feel dry, which one connects most with you? And there's some examples in that little handout of things that you can do this week. What can you intentionally do this week to pour into that? Because ultimately, all of these things, all of these 5 categories, it all comes down to, listen, when we are exhausted, our natural inclination is to remove ourselves, to retreat, to run away. But what God says, that is not how we will find rest. Rest comes when we yoke ourselves to Jesus in relationship, when we get connected to him in all of these aspects, in all of these areas. When we connect to him, that is when we find rest. In Genesis, Adam and Eve, right? They sinned. The very first sin, what do? They run and hide. And I'm sure if they had phones, they'd be doom scrolling, right? Or like watching Netflix or something, right? They're shamed, they're alone, they're disconnected. And they think naturally, our sin leads us to think, hey, what I need to recharge is just me and myself and I. But actually what God says is, no, if you are weary, if you are tired, listen, you've been trying that for however many years, it hasn't brought you rest. Rest comes not from removing or running. It comes actually from taking on the yoke with Jesus in relationship, trusting that he wants to bring us life. Rest is found not from retreating, but engaging with Jesus as he leads us through work, effort, struggle, not just into rest, but into life and life to the full. So wherever you are in this season, maybe of those 5, maybe you're exhausted in all of them. Maybe it's just 1 or 2. Jesus doesn't just want you to add more religion to your life, more rules, more things that you have to do. It's about relationship. And he's inviting you with his yoke this morning. Hey, take my yoke upon you. I don't just want to use you. I want to bring you life and rest. Will you accept it this week? Let me pray.